Okay, so we're diving into some declassified CIA files today. And let me tell you, this is some seriously fascinating stuff. We're talking about unidentified flying objects, UFOs, decades worth of reports from all over the globe.
Yeah, it's not every day we get this kind of peek behind the curtain. What's really amazing is how these files show how differently governments were approaching the whole UFO thing, especially in those early years.
Right. It's like trying to figure out a puzzle, but you're missing half the pieces. We're going to start this deep dive back in December 1953 with a CIA report that basically summarizes a bunch of newspaper articles from back then. France, Germany, South Africa, seems like everyone was seeing strange things in the sky.
It really does. And what's interesting is that from the get-go, you see this mix of like scientific curiosity and public fascination. Some articles are all about, could we build a flying saucer? What would that even look like? But then others are just people saying, whoa, I saw something crazy up there. And the fact that this is all ending up in newspapers tells you people were hooked.
Absolutely. And they were coming up with some wild theories. There's this one French article in this report that actually suggests interstellar ships powered by cosmic energy could be possible.
I know, right? And get this, it was put out by the Study Committee on Military Aeronautics.
Oh,
It's not like they were just dismissing it out of hand. They were at least considering the possibilities.
yeah. Okay, but it gets even wilder. There's a report from a Cape Town newspaper featuring this German engineer, George Klein, who claimed he built and actually flew flying saucers that could hit, get ready for it, 1,300 miles per hour.
1,300, wow. And then there's this Italian inventor who went and patented his own flying disc design. He even
Yeah.
tried to sell it to the U.S. government.
Easy.
Yeah. It really makes you wonder, though, right? Like, in those early days of airplanes and stuff, how did governments decide what was legit research and what was, well,
A little far-fetched.
exactly.
It must have been a trip, like so much new tech was popping up. The line between science fiction and reality had to be super blurry.
Oh, totally. Don't forget, this was a time of huge leaps forward, especially when it came to flying. So the idea of these super advanced flying machines wasn't totally out there.
True, true. Okay, but then things take an even more interesting turn with this eyewitness account from a guy named Link. He'd escaped from the Soviet zone in East Germany, and he describes this huge metallic flying thing with 2 rows of holes. And get this, 2 men inside.
Okay, yeah, Link's account is, it's definitely something. He goes into detail about the shape, the size, even how it moved. He even mentions a ring of flames around it as it took off. You really got to wonder, was this dude seeing some super high-tech thing, or was it just, Cold War nerves getting to him?
I was just going to say, and that's the thing, right? The Cold War adds this whole other layer to everything. Governments were on edge, watching each other like hawks for any sign of, like, oh, they've got better tech than us. Something like Link's story would have had everyone freaking out.
It's wild, right? Like one sighting, and you've got all these different explanations popping up, crazy tech, Cold War, mind games, people just losing it. Shows you the power of the unknown.
No kidding. And speaking of unknowns, let's jump over to Spain and French Africa for a sec. We're in 1952 now, and get this, the reports describe glowing spheres, a red, round thing leaving a trail of bright green light. It's like a cosmic disco party.
I know, right? But here's the thing, it's not just a one-off. We see glowing lights and spheres popping up again and again in these reports. Makes you wonder if there's something to it, like some kind of common thread connecting these things, even across continents. And when you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, it's obvious governments all over the place were writing this stuff down. This wasn't just some local thing. The whole world was starting to buzz about it.
And the buzz was definitely getting louder. Check this out. There's this newspaper, L'Echo d'Oran, and they actually published this whole summary of sightings. They even said that things were happening more often there than in France or the U.S. It's kind of wild to think about, like, were there UFO hotspots back then?
It's a thought, isn't it? And it shows how the whole UFO thing probably played out differently depending on where you were, what the media was saying, how people saw things. That newspaper analysis, though, it definitely suggests that in that part of the world, at least, things were getting weird. And more often, too. Makes you think, was it something in the air? Literally. Or something about those places. Or even just how people lived their lives.
It's a total head-scratcher. Okay, let's fast forward a bit to 1976. We've got a British Airways pilot, and he reports this bright light, like a street lamp, just hovering over Lithuania. And get this, he radios Soviet authorities, asks them, what is that? And they're like, we got nothing.
That one always gets me, because we're talking about a pilot, someone who knows the sky. Right, if they can't figure it out. But the fact that even the Soviets were stumped, It just adds to the whole thing, you know? Was it really something they couldn't explain, or did he just not want to say?
I know, right? Their silence speaks volumes. Which, speaking of silence, let's talk about these redacted documents for a sec. It's like getting a sneak peek, but they're hiding the good stuff. We can see they're about weird lights near Leningrad in 58, and there's this one source that says 99% of UFO sightings are totally explainable. But what about that other 1%? What's the deal with that?
Oh, man, now we're getting to the good stuff. I mean, those blacked out sections, they're practically screaming, "This is juicy." What could be so top secret that they had to keep it hidden, even after all this time? Are we talking government freakouts, hidden projects, something even crazier?
It's like they're saying, hey, look at this crazy stuff. Okay, now you can't look anymore. Talk about a tease. But it definitely gets you thinking.
Totally. It's like they're reminding us that we don't know everything. There's still stuff out there we can't explain.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that source that said like 99% of sightings were probably nothing too weird. What kind of explanations were they talking about, even back then?
Well, even in those top secret meetings, you had folks who were like, hold on, maybe it's not aliens. They were looking at things like, could it be a plane they didn't recognize? Or weird weather? Or even just someone messing around? It's a good reminder that not every light in the sky is a spaceship.
Right. Like sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Exactly.
Okay. But still, you gotta admit, it's kind of cool to think about. Anyway, back to these documents we were talking about, that one that mentioned a bunch of lights near Leningrad. It's frustrating they blacked out so much of it, but we know it involved multiple witnesses, right? So it wasn't just one person seeing things.
Yeah, and the fact that this was near Leningrad, I mean, that's a big city, right? An important military spot, too. This wasn't just some farmer out in the middle of nowhere. People in a big city were seeing this stuff.
And they weren't just like blinking lights either. The report actually says these things were maneuvering in a non-ballistic trajectory, which means it couldn't have been a regular plane or anything.
Oh, right, that's the key detail right there. Whatever they were moving in ways that our tech just couldn't do back then. Makes you wonder, if it wasn't us, then who? Or what?
Yeah, it's a question that has bugged people for ages. And just when you think it can't get any weirder, we get to this last document. 1959, a luminous orange ball seen from a train in the USSR, and that's all they tell us. They couldn't even give us one more sentence.
I know. But even with just that tiny bit of info, you can't help but feel that sense of mystery, right? It's like a little window into a time when people were just starting to wrap their heads around the idea that maybe, just maybe, we weren't alone.
Absolutely. And, we've gone from France to South Africa, glowing spheres to blacked out files. And I gotta say, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. What other secrets are still out there just waiting to be found? Makes you think.
It really does. And that's the beauty of it all, isn't it? There's always more to uncover, more to learn. The exploration never really ends.
You've given us a lot to think about today. What stood out to you from all these reports, and what questions would you ask if you could go back in time and chat with these witnesses, or even the guys who wrote all this stuff down? Who knows? Maybe those answers are out there somewhere, waiting for us to find them.